Okay, so this is the rest of the digestive system. Sorry, I had to clear up some space on my phone so I could keep recording, so it kind of shut off in the middle of the system. Okay, so starting on page 195, not much here to underline, except for I would like you to make a couple of notes that under the section here, endoscopy, stomal. A stoma is an artificial opening, an ostomy is an artificial creation of a hole. You want to make sure that you know the difference between those two. With these stomal endoscopies, all of these codes mean that the oscopy, whatever it was, the sigmoidoscopy, colonoscopy, whatever it is, was performed through a stoma, which means that they did not go through the anus to do that. So just want to make note of that. Not much for you on page 196 or 197. Page 198, we have a couple of notes. You want to go through and underline your Meckel's diverticulum and the mesentery, colon and rectum, and then down here under appendix, just kind of make a note. I made a note here to remind you guys that this isn't an odd location in the manual, but here it is. So if you want to flag it or do whatever you need to do to remember that this is where your appendix is, it would probably be a good idea because there are a lot of appendectomies done. So there's incision and drainage codes here, and then your excision. And remember that your excision is going to be an open procedure. If it's an appendectomy alone, we're going to use 44950. And if it's added on to another procedure, so say that they had a cystectomy, and while they were in there performing that, they had good reason to believe that the appendix needed to come out, then we would use this add-on code here, 44955, which means that it was taken out during another procedure. Then we have laparoscopy codes here for the appendix. And then we move on to the colon and rectum. Incision, excision, not much there for you. Over on page 199, a couple of notes here under endoscopy for the colon and rectum. These are just for the colon. The endoscopy is only for the colon, and you want to make sure you read through these definitions of sigmoidoscopy, colonoscopy, and then colonoscopy through a stoma. You want to make sure you read those pretty well. The note I have in here for you is that if you remember from respiratory that we code scopes to the fullest extent or to the furthest extent. So if the scope, say the doctor ordered sigmoidoscopy, but the notes in the report say that they went to the transverse colon, you'd actually end up coding a colonoscopy because the op report proves that they went further than the sigmoid colon. So if they went transverse, that's up further than the sigmoid colon it would be, and so that's the furthest extent that they went. So you just want to be mindful of that. I underlined 45300 because that's a proctosigmoidoscopy, and that's a pretty common procedure also. Over to page 200, there's a nice little table up there, the colonoscopy decision tree. That's a good tool to use. It helps you kind of figure out what your colonoscopy code should be. Again, I just went through and highlighted certain things that I thought I needed to be aware of or mindful of. Sigmoidoscopy is the code for 54330. Over to page 201. A couple of things I want you to know. Again, lots of sideways arrows here, so we want to make sure that we're paying attention to those codes. The code 45378 is a colonoscopy, so that's a pretty commonly used code. I want you to note that if they are doing two separate things while they're in there, like a biopsy and a polyp removal, then you can code both. You can stack up those scopes. So you would need a modifier to get them paid, but you can do it. Sometimes you'll have that, sometimes you won't. But just so you know that you can stack those scope codes and get them both paid out if they're doing two separate things while they're in there at the same time. Over on code 45384 and 45385, I like to underline sometimes the techniques or the specifics about the codes just to draw my eyes to it when I'm looking at that code in particular. So 45384 is for hot biopsy, and 45385 is by snare technique. So for 384, like for example, we could use 384 and 385 together if they remove two polyps with 2 different techniques. So if they went in there and removed one polyp by way of hot biopsy, we would use 45384, and then they removed a second polyp with a snare technique, we could use 45385 and get both of those scopes paid out. So that's it for 200. Oh. Okay, again, over with on page 202, we're talking about laparoscopies for that section, and then remember that that's a closed approach. We move over to 203, and that's where it starts your codes with the anus, so I would underline anus because that's a body part there. Not much here. Again, we have endoscopy codes on page 204, and then repair, destruction. We go over to 205, where we have other procedures, and then under other procedures starts our accessory organs. So we're going to start with the liver. And I just wrote a note that this is where the accessory organs begins, but that's pretty much all I have on 205. For 206, we start with the biliary tract. I would like you to note, and this is the only note that I have on this page, that that includes the gallbladder. So your biliary tract does include the gallbladder, which is an accessory organ. So that's all I have there on 206. 207, just underline pancreas for the body part. If I can make my fingers work. 208, not a whole lot there. 209, underline the abdomen, peritoneum, and omentum, which are additional accessories to the digestive system. We have codes for those: excision, destruction, laparoscopy codes. 210, those are the laparoscopy codes continued until we get down to the introduction, revision, and removal. I don't have any other notes there or on 211, but 212 it looks like I do. So for 212, under repair, you need to make sure that you read this hernioplasty, herniorrhaphy, and then herniotomy. So read those different descriptions for those codes because that's going to make a difference in your code selection. I don't have anything up top, but down over here at the bottom, starting with 49500, those start your hernia repair codes. And so basically what I did in the pink underlines here was went through and underlined the type and whether it was reducible or not for most of them, or if it was a recurrent hernia. I just underlined basic things that I thought was going to be important. So if you look at code 49501, it says incarcerated or strangulated. That means that it's a stuck hernia. That means the hernia is stuck. It's incarcerated in whatever position it's in. So it's stuck there and it can't expand or move at all. You should know that all these hernia repairs will be all open approach procedures. Page 213, I went through the remainder of the hernia codes and just underlined where I thought I needed to there, so you can see those in pink. Code 49658 is used for an incisional or ventral hernia. So an incisional or ventral hernia. Again, that continues on with the open approach that will be used to repair those hernias as well. Then we get down to our closed approach, which is our laparoscopy. And there are 4 things, just like there are in a whole bunch of the other chapters, that I would like for you to know. And these are going to help you decide what code to use for these laparoscopy codes. Okay? So first of all, you want to know the patient age. Second, you want to know whether the approach was open or laparoscopic. Good Lord. Laparoscopic. So if it was open, then that means they made an incision and went into. If it was laparoscopic, then they just put a scope in and used that approach. The type of hernia that's being repaired, and then the behavior of the hernia is something else that's important. Okay. So that's it for digestive. I'm going to make another video for urinary, so I'll be back in just a minute.